Hi, everybody. Welcome to another session of the 2017 webinar presentations by the State Unit on Aging. We're happy to have you here today. This one in particular is especially exciting because it's geared for elder rights and issue spotting for those of you who are working with folks one-on-one. And I'm hoping that Christian's also going to talk with us a little bit about the definitions with conservatorship and guardianship and some of that stuff. So I have here with me today Christian Hale, who is policy analyst and the legal assistance developer. And I'm going to let him tell you more about him in just a couple minutes. But I want to remind you guys that we are recording the webinar, and that's why you guys are all on mute. You can text chat questions, and also if you have a group site, if you have several people at your site, please text chat and let us know who all is there. We did attach the PowerPoint to the webinar, but you can also send a quick email if you didn't get it to Lori, Lori.c, as in cat, .watt, W-A-T-T, at state.or.us. And just in the subject line say, need webinar material, and she will shoot you a copy of the PowerPoint. Let's see, what else? We sent those materials out yesterday afternoon. Hopefully you've got them. Also, I just want to remind you that when the webinar is over in a very short period of time, you'll get an email from Lori with a SurveyMonkey link in it, so that you can let us know how we did, and I'll remind you again about that at the end of the session. So I'm just going to go. I want to let you guys know that Christian has some questions for you. We're going to start off with a couple of poll questions, just so he can get a feel for what you guys know or do or how you work. So the first, let me go ahead and let him tell you about himself, and then we'll jump into the questions and go on with the presentation.
Thank you, Sue Ann, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Christian Hale. I work for Oregon DHS Aging and People with Disabilities. It's a pleasure to be speaking to you this fine and sunny Wednesday afternoon. I hope everything's going well where you are. In my position, I serve as a policy analyst and also the legal assistance developer. The legal assistance developer is a required position for a state to have under the Older Americans Act. And the Older Americans Act is federal law that dates back to 1964, 1965, and it has been amended several times since. That is fully available online if you should care to take a look through that. And that is a law that operates in addition to all of the state laws that we have here in Oregon. For those of you that weren't aware, Oregon Revised Statutes is where to find all of Oregon's state laws. And so elder law and elder rights, at least from a legal perspective, is based part on state law, part on the Older Americans Act, and numerous other federal laws as well. A little bit more about me. Prior to rejoining APD, I've worked in Oregon and in Nevada as a lawyer, licensed also in Washington, but I wasn't based there. I've worked for Adult Protective Services through my previous position with OAPI, that's the Office of Adult Abuse Prevention and Investigations. And with all of that experience, it makes me very excited to serve APD in this role, to help you and all of Oregon's consumers needing legal assistance as they age. So before we get into the presentation summary, I think we'll launch straight into those first couple questions just to see how many of you are out there and to get us fired up for this seminar. Thank you.
Okay. So the first question is, do you already keep a phone number to refer callers to a lawyer? Yes, no, or not sure? I'll give you about 30 seconds here. Now you won't be able to see if you... Okay, wow, awesome, guys. It looks like it's 100% yes.
Well, that's fantastic news. Thank you, everybody. And as you might have guessed, as part of this webinar, we'll be giving you a couple numbers, but it sounds like you already have that covered.
Okay, and the second question is, for legal assistance, do you usually refer callers to the Oregon State Bar, ADRC, Phone Book Google, some attorney that you know, or a AAA contracted legal service provider? So please put your answers in now. We'll give you just about 30 seconds or so here. Looks like almost everybody is, we've got kind of a split there. Looks like we've got a split. Thank you so much. We've got a split between ADRCs and the AAA contracted legal service provider.
That is excellent news. I'm very pleased to see that. For other callers that may come in, if they should be outside of your immediate service area, say you're in the south of Oregon and you have a caller in the north, then you can either refer them to the contracted legal service provider for the other relevant AAA if you know that. If not, the Aging and Disability Resource Center or even the Oregon State Bar. Thank you, Sue.
Sure.
Well, let's launch into the main portion of the webinar now, and we will intersperse these slides with a few more questions for you as we go on. So elder rights generally, as people age, they continue to have all of the same rights they had before, as you might imagine. What changes as people age is there are more specific laws to protect them than protect the general population. That first bullet point under elder rights generally is that people retain all of their rights that have not been taken away. And I point that out just to refer to a couple population types that do lose rights under various scenarios. One that comes to mind is prisoners. And another is, interestingly, a more relevant field of population, guardianship. When people have a guardian appointed for them, that person ends up having legal responsibility to make decisions for the person who becomes a protected person. And so legally, at least, the individual would lose a few rights, but not, of course, the right to have someone take care of them. The responsibility just passes to the guardian. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that in a few slides' time. We'll also cover some common legal issues as people age, and we'll have quite a listing of those to cover. So common issues, generally speaking, civil matters are what we refer people to attorneys around the state when they call in through the ADRCs. For criminal matters, those are usually not funded by state or federal grants that would assist with lowering the cost of hiring a lawyer. And there may sporadically be some criminal defense attorneys that offer their services at a low or reduced rate, but I believe that's the exception, not the rule. And so when we talk about legal services referrals today, we're talking about civil matters generally. Particularly, we'll be talking about priority issues under the Older Americans Act. I have a listing of what the priority legal issues are according to federal law, and we'll look at some state laws that come under that same umbrella of protection. And we'll briefly mention some referrals to adult protective services and how that may interact with legal services provisions around the state. Again, this webinar will not cover a great deal of adult protective services information. I know you can get that information elsewhere. Lastly, I point out the opportunity for referrals and cross-referrals to law enforcement. That comes up in elder rights in a couple of ways. First, with adult protective services, as you probably know, there are cross-referral requirements. When adult protective services suspect that a crime has been committed, they can cross-refer to law enforcement. In fact, they're required to, and the same requirement is for law enforcement agencies to cross-refer to adult protective services if the person is of the applicable age to be served. Lastly, there are some attorney ethics rules that govern when an attorney may or should report potential criminal activity to authorities. I won't be going into those attorney ethics rules today, but it's just helpful for you to know that there are some. Lastly, when we get into the topic of referrals to lawyers, these are two general points that you can bear in mind. Pretty much in every case, the lawyer that meets with a client is going to enter into a representation and fee agreement with the individual who's to become a client. That is, if the client-to-be decides he or she wants to hire this lawyer, and if so, then they will agree on what the fee arrangement will be. Under some of the programs that operate through AAAs and federal law, there are opportunities for reduced fees, and we'll talk a little bit more about those. Client access is something for you to be aware of in several contexts, really, and it's not simply a matter of referring a caller to a lawyer. As you can imagine, some of our population here in Oregon have disabilities that might prevent them from going to an attorney's office. In that case, either the referral or the attorney, him or herself, can assist with alternate arrangements. There may be opportunities for representation by telephone, by video conference, or indeed house calls. In other scenarios where that won't work, then the lawyer may suggest hiring a different attorney. And another thought of client access relates to language. There are certain populations here in Oregon that do not have English as a first language. As you know, as frequent referrals to lawyers, there are translation services available by telephone or in person. Not every lawyer around the state will necessarily be aware of those opportunities, so that is something for you to consider when you make your referrals to clients that call in. And lastly, I've included a few resources through this webinar. If you have any questions on additional possible resources, you can let us know at the end of this session. So generally, we're moving on to the Federal Older Americans Act now. It starts with a declaration of objectives for older Americans. Under federal law, older Americans refers to age 60 plus. In Oregon, under state law, it's usually 65 plus, but for this section of the webinar, we're looking at age 60 and older. I won't read all of this to you, but generally, Congress decided back when it authorized this act that as people age, they should be guaranteed certain rights in America as they age. Particularly as their incomes may decline and their productivity in terms of employment may decline also. Nonetheless, they're entitled to full and free enjoyment of the following. The OAA objectives are 10 in number, at least as far as identified under the Act, and I'll just scoot through some of these for you. And as we go through these, for example, income and retirement, physical and mental health, you'll notice that some of these are fully objective in that they assume that the best possible care or scenario can come to pass. Again, that's because this is an objective. It doesn't mean that at a federal or state level we're necessarily close to reaching all of these objectives, but on a day-to-day basis we work towards them. The second one, for example, science changes on a weekly basis, it seems, and research that is available through federal or state entities can ideally be passed on to consumers. So maintaining and obtaining suitable housing, restorative services, and employment opportunities even as people age. As you know, not everyone chooses to retire at age 62, 65, or 67, and there's always opportunity for part-time work where desired. As we move on, we see some additional protections and objectives that people should not be treated differently or disparagingly due to their age or any other factor that affects them as they should age. One of the things that the State Unit on Aging and other government entities undertake are civic, cultural, and educational training and recreational opportunities, or steering consumers towards those. Transportation is certainly continuing to be an issue in Oregon, not only for elders, but for all of our population. And as you may have noticed in this last legislative session, our legislature agreed and passed a statewide transportation package, part of which will improve access to low-cost transportation for seniors. And this last one addresses a combination of legal services, adult protective services, and improved advocacy opportunities, not only for lawyers and APS specialists, but for other advocates around the state. So that was federal law. There are more of those, of course, but let's skip on to some specific Oregon rights that you can find in our revised statutes. This section on the screen now is the Nursing Home Patients Bill of Rights. That applies to people who are residents of nursing facilities and skilled nursing facilities. They are two particular types of adult care home. There are others that we'll get to and briefly mention. Another section is adult foster homes. Those are governed under ORS Chapter 443. They have a specific listed residence rights in statute there. And for residential care facilities, that's another third classification of types of care home. They have their own section in the ORS, Oregon Revised Statutes. And while their residence rights don't appear in statute, they were provided for by rule, and there are applicable rules in the OARs, that is Oregon Administrative Rules. Home health agencies is another area of care and assistance provided by the state to its elder citizens, and revised statutes address applicable standards as noted at the end of this slide. So some typical problems that come in for referral to either lawyers or government agencies or informational referral are how to apply for or keep government benefits. Additional ones here are housing, and that could be with any change in housing type as a person ages. Common are reverse mortgages, but also deciding to rent, buy, or sell, or even change the title on a person's house, either as part of an estate plan, for example, leaving it to a child or particular children, or mortgaging to get money to pay for a care home, renting it out, or just general selling it. Prescription coverage and hospital bills continue to be an issue as people age, basically as care costs continue to increase, and changes in the national insurance and state insurance landscapes continue to change. Oftentimes, referral to a lawyer could be very helpful for identifying and upholding an Oregonian's rights with regard to those, and for reviewing hospital bills and responding to concerns about those. Estate planning is an issue that all seniors, or at least most seniors, certainly consider as they age. That is writing a will, changing their will, or coming up with some other method to distribute their property when they pass. Interestingly enough, estate planning is not a priority area under the Older Americans Act, but I fully expect that you will regularly get callers requesting information on how to contact a lawyer about that. Financial management help, that doesn't necessarily require a lawyer. Options are, of course, having family members help out. having an agent under a power of attorney, having a representative payee for federal benefits. The Oregon Money Management Program is an excellent resource for some consumers. Where a lawyer would be required is if conservatorship might be needed, and I'll cover that in a little more detail soon. Similar issues are marrying or divorcing later in life. There are a whole bunch of potential legal snags that a client might want to know about if one of those, either marrying or divorcing, occurs once a person is receiving government benefits. Certainly an attorney experienced in those issues, either in estate planning or family law or both, would be able to provide advice on those specific situations. Grandparents' rights is also applicable. That normally refers to grandparents' visitation rights for grandchildren. In the legal arena, that's part of family law, but I do believe that the State Unit on Aging, and in conjunction with another government agency, has come out with an excellent brochure on this. Do contact the State Unit on Aging if you're interested in that publication. Other issues that might affect elders as they age are loss of mobility, meaning physical mobility. That again relates to applying for or keeping government benefits. And if a person should be threatened with losing their driver's license or losing it, they may wish to object to that and see a lawyer about how to get that reinstated, or at least how to challenge the decision. Domestic violence and other abuses are generally handled initially by Adult Protective Services, by, of course, Child Protective Services for another age population, by law enforcement, of course, 911 and other medical services. But even in cases where prosecution does not occur or doesn't move forward for some reason, that would be criminal law, then there may be opportunity for a civil lawyer to intervene and provide some assistance as the matter moves forward. And scams, a good place to check out scams or refer people about scams is the Attorney General's webpage. Scams are also investigated by a number of federal and state agencies, including the Department of Consumer and Business Services and Adult Protective Services. A lawyer may be able to assist in some of those situations.
So let's just jump in here and do another question. Since he talked just a tiny bit about estate planning, let's see who knows what estate planning might focus on. And I understand that I forgot to show you guys the results, so I'm so sorry. And I will show you the results this time. So I'm going to give you about 30 seconds. So estate planning, does it focus on farm law, real estate law, distributing a client's assets before or after death, or is it handled in a probate proceeding? So the poll's in progress. Oh my goodness, we've got a few more people to still vote. So I'll give you just another 10 seconds or so here. About 63% have voted. There we go, 75%. So almost everybody's in there. Okay, and I'm going to remember I'm going to close the poll and I'm going to share the results. Yay. So 100% of people said that estate planning is distributing a client's assets before or after death. How'd they do, Kristen?
Well, you're all geniuses. That's correct. Yes. Can't teach you anything about this. That was a great response, and we have the right people out there in information referral and public service. Thank you.
Awesome.
So we're moving on to some challenges to elder rights. These are the main ones. Hopefully the second one here is covered by all the people calling into information and referral sources, such as yourselves. And the last one is lack of cognitive function. When a person has Alzheimer's and related dementias, they may not be in a place where they are cognizant of all the best ways to help themselves or get other people to help them. Fortunately, we have many strong advocates and different stakeholders around the states that are willing to help people exercise their rights, and we'll get to a few more ways to doing that. So here are a few of the ones that you are most likely aware of, a few of the larger community and advocacy organizations. Generally, these are outside of state agencies, except for the first one, Oregon's Long-Term Care Ombudsman's Office. They provide services to residents of people in long-term care facilities all over Oregon. AARP is the second one, Disability Rights Oregon. Elders in Action is a nonprofit agency that operates in the Tri-County area in the north of Oregon, that is Multnomah, Washington, and Clackamas counties. They offer volunteer advocate services. So if you're in one of those three counties, you may be familiar with Elders in Action. And area agencies on aging, of course. So for accessing legal services, these, I think, are the older, more traditional methods of access to those. We're moving on now to the resources that we mentioned earlier. Word of mouth is still a strong one. In your referral world, you may well become aware of attorneys that respond more favorably and more quickly than others. So you may have your own ideas about referrals to those. In the north of the state, and I think in a couple other larger counties, senior centers offer senior law clinics or a variant on those for people in their community to come there rather than having to visit a lawyer's office. And if you happen to use the Oregon State Bar as a referral source, they will refer a caller to 3 different lawyers in the caller's topic area or most relevant area of law, as close as possible to where the caller happens to live. So that will give the caller usually 3 different options of who to call. Okay, so here we're just going to cover a couple more types of legal services here. There's the civil law, which is state court cases that aren't criminal in nature or representation before government agencies. Usually in the private market, they're fee-for-service. Under the Older Americans Act and a couple other sources, there is funding available that will pay for the lawyer, or at least a certain amount of a lawyer's time. And of course, pro bono for those excellent attorneys that choose to offer their services free from time to time to people that need that. Criminal prosecution is handled by the government. And as I mentioned earlier, criminal defense is seldom covered by federal or state grants. Referring you to legal services standards, what this it relates to is AAA's contract with a local attorney or legal service provider to provide services under the Older Americans Act. There's a link there to take you to the current legal services standards for those contracts and the type of service that needs to be provided and what the priorities are. I won't click on that now. There is a separate webinar available on that. And in fact, the standards are due to have an update very soon.
Oh boy, more work for you, huh?
More work for me, indeed. So what the Older Americans Act does talk about is targeting of services. We'll quickly break that down into 2 targeting types. Arguably, you can subdivide these, but basically services under this act and the money that comes through it should be prioritized to those with the greatest economic need and the greatest social need. And there is some breakdown in social need there describing what that means. So the priority issue areas for those attorneys that contract with your AAA to provide services, at least for Older Americans Act money, are legal issues affecting all of these. Might be helpful to print out a copy of this page and keep it handy for referrals. That way your client will know whether, if there is Older Americans Act money available, he or she might get a free attorney, whereas otherwise under other types of grant or program to legal services organizations, different payment arrangements might be set up, either with grant assistance or not. So income and protection of income, this is one of the priority areas. We'll briefly go through that. Here are at least a large number of sources of income for a senior. Certainly not all of our population have access to all of these. But it's important to know that legal services provided under the Older Americans Act should not be income-based. That is, the attorney should not refuse to serve an elder under that particular grant money just because he or she is not destitute, it's not below the federal poverty level, or other aspects related to income. It's a peculiarity that affects this particular funding source. In threats to income, here are some of the typical ones. Benefits overpayments, they can be a challenge to a great many consumers when asked to pay back benefits, obviously because they may not be receiving that much income in the first place. Loss of eligibility for benefits is usually time to contact an attorney or at least some other highly experienced advocate out in the general stakeholder advocates group. But there are attorneys that specialize in appeals for Social Security, disability benefits, and other types of benefit. And indeed that they make excellent use of their time. Usually you won't find attorneys that just dabble in that. They either do it full-time or not. It's quite a specialty, and so oftentimes they would be an excellent referral source. Your AAA contracted legal service provider may or may not be an expert in that type of law. A good place to start is there. If not, then perhaps referral to the Oregon State Bar may help. And lastly, taxes. I guess that is arguably a threat to income. Taxes need to be paid, but you know, for elderly people in higher income brackets who can still be served by a lawyer under OAA, or even they may just want to hire or have a referral to their own private lawyer, they can give tax advice in many situations. Social Security retirement is one of the objectives for older Americans under Congress's OAA. Here's some of the requirements for Social Security. All of this information on how to apply is available on ssa.gov. That's the link down at the bottom here. You may well already have more information to give callers than this. There are additional advocates who can help, and in cases where an application is challenged or presents a particular problem, referral to an attorney may help. Particularly rights to appeal a decision on a claim. There are time limits in which written notice of appeal has to be presented. When that becomes applicable, referral to an attorney is probably a very good idea. SSI is age-based and disability-based. For age-based, it's the people 65 and older, as noted here. The dollar amount of SSI in some situations can be almost ridiculously small. It's not much money to get by on, but if you look at the third bullet point, in my opinion, one of the most important reasons for qualifying for SSI age-based is to get access to medical coverage and Medicare prescription coverage. Anytime that you can preserve that type of benefit, it's certainly worth the paperwork, in my opinion. And as people age to 65 and older, SSI should be something that would be considered by most elders. There are complex rules about what counts as assets. I won't go over those today. They appear in administrative rule and in agency guidelines. And again, appealing adverse decisions to a client can be referred to a legal specialist. Disability benefits are available for those under age 65, and here are some of the criteria for accessing those benefits. I'll slowly go through these. Now, this is not an area of law that I know a great deal about, but I've been doing some reading about it recently, and I came across some data that suggested there are very frequent denials for applications for disability benefits under the Social Security program. I read data, for example, that up to 75% of all applications are initially denied. I haven't seen the data for that, but it's a pretty frightening number if that's true, and so there are understandably quite a number of lawyers that do specialize in this, and fairly prompt referral to a lawyer may preserve a person's rights and get some reconsideration there. There are some pretty rigorous standards for disability benefits that goes into different definitions of disability types, medical conditions, and all of those come into play, and these can be quite lengthy claims.
Christian, I believe that the Centers for Independent Living, the CILs, that are partners in our ADRC, also do a lot of work with folks to help them get the disability benefits and help them process and get ready for hearings and things like that.
That's wonderful. That's an excellent resource. Thank you, Sue Ann. So healthcare is another priority access for older Americans under the OAA, that's Older Americans Act. I'm going to go through a few of these as examples of relevant healthcare related law, and we'll take a look at some of these links here too. HIPAA release forms are something that you may find various places on the internet. Some state agencies or hospitals may provide their own. That's in addition, of course, to attorneys drafting them to order. But those are obviously applicable for people that might wish to help a loved one out with those or have access to medical information. Topic that comes up for legal services referrals, usually as part of estate planning, but not always, is delegation of healthcare decisions. In Oregon, that's advance directive. It used to be called a power of attorney for healthcare. It's basically the same thing, but the advance directive is a bit more updated and provides a few additional benefits. I'm going to click on this link here just to take you to show you what one looks like here. And this is a DCBS website. That's Department of Consumer and Business Services. So we'll just see if this link is working for you. There we go. So this is the standard state advance directive form. You can read this in much smaller print in the actual statutes, but this is the usual type of form that most healthcare providers and many legal service providers use. Important to know that you don't have to see a lawyer to fill one of these out. That's good to know. So, it'll save your client some money if he or she doesn't. But it's very common for a lawyer to help a client work through this as part of an overall estate plan, just to make sure this doesn't get omitted. There are strict requirements on changing the language in here. Basically, you can't, except for a few little places where you can. Some attorneys add an addendum to this. But generally, this is a state-specific form that can not be altered very much at all. There are requirements for who can be your healthcare representative and how to execute, that is, how to sign this form, and they appear later down in the document here. There's general information up front, and as you get into parts B and C, you go into the particular details that you want on your advance directive. So I'm going to back out of that one now. We'll have a quick look at POLST in Oregon. POLST is Physician Orders for Life-Sustaining Treatment. Interestingly enough, this is a form that is not filled out with a lawyer. It's filled out with a client's medical provider, or usually a primary care physician, or it can be a nurse with a relevant license or some other licensed care provider. The particulars are in statute. I provide this link as a good summary of what is a POLST, and this particular website takes you to when it should and should not be used. There's some best practices there as prepared by Oregon Health and Science University.
Christian, many of us are familiar with what's called a DNR. Is the POLST, is it similar to a DNR? It's my understanding that it's better now and they don't really take like just regular DNRs anymore because they want this POLST instead.
A POLST is somewhat similar in that both are physician's orders as to what will happen. The POLST is, I would say, something that is perhaps better because it gives a patient more time to discuss preferences with his primary care provider in a non-emergency situation usually. DNRs are prepared by doctors, as far as I know, not necessarily only according to POLST standards or recommendations.
Great.
So this is something else that as people age, they perhaps should have in their toolbox of being prepared for aging. Certainly that's a discussion for people to have with their primary care physician. And Oregon's Death with Dignity law, I mentioned that only because there is one really. This used to be much more controversial. Oregon was the first state to have one. Several more states do now. If you want the particulars, this link takes you just to a summary of that, not to the actual law itself. The law is in ORS Chapter 127. I provide a link to that later. But this is a basic summary of Death with Dignity Act requirements.
Christian, we have a question about whether there are resources to get these forms for the Advance Directive and the POLST and this information in languages other than English.
Yes, I believe there are. As far as the POLST form goes, if you go to the POLST website, there is you can either Google that or there is a link to it through this link. I think it's something like OregonPolst.com. And you go to the forms section. I believe they have even some video presentations in Spanish, certainly, and perhaps one or two other languages. Contact Oregon POLST for additional languages for that form if it's not already on their website. And they should either be able to come up with one or the primary care physician may have those available in his hospital or clinic.
Great, thank you.
I can't confirm that, but it's certainly worth asking. And as far as Advance Directive, I doubt you will find that in a translated foreign language, but it's certainly a good idea to have translation, perhaps with an interpreter as needed to explain how it works. I think basically the reason for the more strict requirement is that is a statutory form. Certainly an interpreter could provide, or a translator could translate it for the client, but I don't think that would necessarily have the same legal status as the English version. That's not definitive though, but just a first thought.
Thank you.
And as I mentioned, all of those laws that we've just talked about and a couple more are available through this link. This link basically just takes you to the text of ORS 127. You can see that at the end of the link there. And in there you'll find the laws on powers of attorney, how long they're good for, how to execute one, the same with advance directives, the POLST registry, declarations for mental health treatment, which is a topic I'll not get into today, but that's something else for people to consider as part of state or long-term healthcare planning. And Oregon's Death with Dignity Act, the details are in there.
I know you mentioned previously a little bit about civil court. Just for fun, guys, let's, he's got a question here that says, if somebody is sued in a state court, how long do you, and does anybody know how long a person typically has to file a response? So it would be, do they have 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months, or 3 years? So I'll give you about 30 seconds if anybody knows. if somebody gets sued in state court, do you have any idea how long a person typically has to file a response? It looks like so far everybody's going for 3 months. We've got a couple people saying 3 days. Anybody else got a guess here? We'll give you another 10 or 15 seconds just to see what we got. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and we'll share. Some of you did not answer, but it looks like most people thought we had about 3 months. Are we on the mark?
You're pretty close. 20% of you were on the mark. The right answer is 3 weeks, actually. Usually, under the Oregon Rules of Civil Procedure, that's ORCP. You can find those online if you're fascinated by this stuff. You normally get about 3 weeks, 21 days, plus a few days for mailing to reply to an initial complaint. That's for your average garden variety civil lawsuit. There are some exceptions and differences, maybe slightly different in federal courts, but we're not talking about that today. And when we're talking about guardianships, it's a little bit less than that. For guardianships, it's actually 15 days, but they do tack on a few extra days for mailing, so that takes it up to about 18. But the main point for putting this in here is to remind you that when people call saying they've got legal papers or they're being sued or something like that, you can usually bet they're not calling you on the very first day they receive the paperwork. So bear in mind the lawyer that is waiting on the other end of a telephone to help them may not have a lot of time. So perhaps as an idea, if you're going to end up doing a warm handoff and talking to a legal service provider, you can let them know when the person said they got served with the papers, but more likely than not, that's going to be a discussion for the client and the lawyer. But when they call mentioning that, just ask them when they got served or when the papers showed up, and that will give you an indication on how fast they have to move. And of course, more time is always better because lawyers usually stay busy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sue Ann. So we're moving on to some long-term care referral issues right now. There are a great many housing options as people age. They can get care at home, as you know. Many folks only want to live in their own home as they age. Here are some other options. All of them are potentially susceptible to legal issues and problems depending on a person's financial and health status. Most of these care facilities, as we've already discussed, have specific patient and residence rights. They have statutes governing the type of care that a person is entitled to, their visitation rights, property rights, that sort of thing. And so if a person needs assistance in any of these areas, in addition to some of the advocates I referred to earlier, such as the long-term care ombudsman, legal professionals can assist with some of these. Could be for something as simple as reviewing a move-in contract for an assisted living facility or care facility, or helping to fight an eviction from one of those. From the APD agency standpoint, evictions normally go through an administrative law process, through an administrative law judge. But civil court is always an option as well for clients, depending on the outcome of various situations. And there are particularly statutes, rules, and requirements relating to memory care and dementia facilities. And again, we covered the Residents' Bill of Rights in its various formats earlier. Just a reminder there. For complaints about facility living, a number of resources there. A very good one, of course, is the referral to the Long-Term Care Ombudsman's Office. They have deputies in a number of different areas around the state, and a great many certified ombudsman volunteers who will work to do an excellent job at, I understand, no cost at all to the client. So that's often a very good referral there. and indeed some attorneys choose to refer to those services where possible to help a client save money. But when evictions move forward, certainly it's good to have another advocate in a person's corner, whether that's the ombudsman, whether it's another advocate, or a hired attorney. So here are some resources that I won't dive into in detail here, but these are, I think, 3 different resources on how a client can best choose somewhere else to live as they age, assuming they don't want to stay at home. This, of course, isn't only for clients, but for like their children, their partners, anyone else that can help find them a suitable place to live, whether on just a short-term recovery basis or potentially a lifelong option for living. As you might expect, a variety of different price points and quality around the state in terms of what a particular consumer might get for his or her money. But nonetheless, even at the lower end of the pay scale, for example, people who get their care paid for generally by Medicaid, there are particular, a great many standards to protect resident rights, care, health, and safety in all of these homes. Oregon's licensing agency, which is now a part of APD, it's based just out of Salem here, does an excellent job in licensing and regulating a very large number of Oregon's licensed facilities.
Christian, I missed a question back there around the power of attorney kinds of things. And the question was, can a power of attorney be executed in Oregon without an attorney? And is it advisable to do those power of attorney and pulse things?
Oh, okay. So that was a question that came in, and the question was,
can the power of attorney be executed in Oregon without an attorney?
The answer to that...
And is it advisable if it is?
Yeah, the answer is yes. As to whether or not it's advisable to have a lawyer, I think if you do hire a lawyer to draft one, the lawyer will advise the person of what rights he or she is giving away, for how long, and could give some counseling advice on whether is that a good idea, whether they might like to consider a different person, an additional person, a backup person for if the first person is unavailable for some reason. Basically, that would be a person other than the presumptive agent who would look out for the individual. Having said that, typically you will pay a lawyer for that assistance. A lot of people, not only for cost, but perhaps for convenience, might prefer to go find a form on the website, on a website somewhere. Something to bear in mind if you're taking the do-it-yourself approach is that you want to make sure somehow that the form that you find is valid in Oregon. A lot of those just posted to the internet generally are based on some other state's laws or a combination of laws, or unless you know any better, they could just be based on made-up laws. But you can find forms. Some form production companies make them available online or in physical facilities for not very much money. So you can use those, and they probably are valid as long as they comply with Oregon law. The difference is basically what advice you're getting in filling it out. If you trust the person that's helping you fill it out, that might be enough, but you may overlook some significant legal issues, and as time has often told, some of those can lead to expensive mistakes. But the short answer is yes, you can do it yourself.
Thank you. And we are probably going to go full time, so I just want to remind everybody we've got about another half an hour, and this is great information.
All right, thank you. So we're going to go through some of these, and in the interests of time, I'll skip through some of these. Nutrition is another one of the OAA priority service areas. As far as relevance to legal assistance, I could think of SNAP and dietary and menu requirements in facilities if clients should need assistance with those. And of course, you know, at the other end of the care scale, we have potential abuses, a couple of those that may be based on deficits in nutrition. So housing and utilities is something that attorneys can help with, mostly Oregon's landlord-tenant law. The statutes, and I do give a link to the statutes there, that's ORS Chapter 90, or 090 as it says on the link there. You can look up the different landlord-tenant laws there. They go over the landlord and the tenant's obligations. Generally, this comes up most often in evictions and eviction rights, but also in applications for rentals and whether there's any improper discrimination in those. Good news for people with landlord-tenant problems is this can often be handled through small claims court, and we have a small claims court question or two coming up, I think. And so that would be a quicker way to get this resolved at a lower cost than full-blown litigation usually. Utility shutoffs can ideally be handled through contact with the utility company itself or some assistive advocacy organization. For example, Elders in Action up in the Tri-County area in the north of the state.
We had a couple questions here. One is, he just said, do you have to have a lawyer? Do you need to hire a lawyer for small claims court? That's a yes or a no. So I'll give you about 10 seconds. Do you need a lawyer for small claims court? Anybody? Good job, quickly voting. Awesome. Okay, I'm going to close it. And it looks like everybody says no.
And everybody is, yep, everybody's correct. You don't need one. In fact, you are usually not allowed to have one unless you can convince the judge that you need one for some reason. Usually, for example, if the other side has somehow managed to successfully petition to have a lawyer, in that case you might be successful too. But normally lawyers are kept out of small claims court. And let's just do that other question.
Yeah, and then how much money? Do you know how much, up to what amount can be disputed in a, or awarded in a small claims court? So up to what amount? And here's your options: 500, 5,000, 10,000, or 75,000. So just real quickly, everybody vote. So everybody's going for, oh, a few people. Okay, looks like most people have voted. So let's close it and share it. And it looks like we have a split between 5,000 and 10,000.
Well, it would be great if the answer was 7,500, so everyone would be pretty close. It used to be, but currently it is at 10,000. Inflation has caught up, and so you can sue for up to 10,000 in small claims court. If you want to sue for more money than that, then you have to step up to your general state court. Or instead, you can opt to go the small claims court process and just forego recovery of any amount above 10,000. That's one option too. If you're wondering what to do, strangely enough, you could ask a lawyer for an estimate of how much it would cost to pursue the higher amount and see if it's worth the difference. So we're moving on to another topic now. Defense of guardianship. This is a fascinating and quite complicated topic, one of my favorites. However, I shall breeze through it as quickly as time allows here. Defense of guardianship is one of the priority legal services areas under the Older Americans Act. Interestingly enough, I think it's one that is, it's a service that is not offered that frequently, either under OAA payment money or otherwise. The largest number of guardianships and conservatorships are not disputed, but you know, in order to protect rights as people age, defense of guardianship is a priority service area. And that should be the case under your AAA's contract with its provider. So these are the issues that basically go through this area of law. Guardianship is basically about surrogate decision making. It's when, for one reason or another, whether it's dementia or concussion or something else, a person is in a condition that he or she can't make safe decisions about their health, safety, food, housing, healthcare, that sort of thing. Basically, they are in serious need of someone to help them get healthcare services. And so when they can't make a decision for whatever reason, either they're in a coma, they're unconscious, they can't communicate for some reason, then a guardian can be appointed. This is a court process. You need to find a lawyer to do this kind of work. APD, that is Aging and People with Disabilities, does have a process to assist Adult Protective Services in finding money for this sort of thing. Speak with your APS people as that may arise. And of course, there are referral opportunities. Under OAA contracts, your legal service provider should be able to handle this, assuming that funds available will cover it or part of it. There are alternatives to guardianship, such as powers of attorney if people have them, but other times people don't have those. We'll briefly cover the definitions of the next couple points. And just to let you know, there are several different types of guardianship available. A new term is plenary. That means basically a full guardianship. That didn't used to have a name. It was just the default, but it now has a name after legislation passed in this past session. And that's to alternate with limited guardianship, which is where a guardian is given some particular powers to help another person, but not all available powers. The available powers are listed mostly in statute. A few additional ones may be available through examination of case law, but generally it's statutory based. Temporary guardianships are when you need to get one in a hurry because otherwise somebody will be in significant harm if they don't get medical care. That's basically just a faster version. Temporary guardianships can be put in place in a week or less. If you wait the normal period for a regular guardianship, you're often looking at least a 6-week wait. Again, an attorney will be able to advise on what's best in a particular situation. I won't go through the whole guardianship process right now, but you can get a good gist of it through looking at the statutes. In case I don't have it in here, that's ORS Chapter 125, or you can actually Google that here in Oregon and find a whole lot of good information either on attorney websites, on the state websites, and some other places. So for challenging a guardianship, here are some different reasons for doing it. I go into more detail on the next slide, but basically a respondent, who is the person who is, let's say, unwell and for whom a guardianship is proposed, has a chance to object, and so do other people that get notice. That's usually close family members and a few others. Again, details are in the statutes. Guardians can be removed for different reasons, and guardianships can be terminated when they're no longer needed. And that is either when somebody recovers, which is the good news, or the other alternative is if somebody passes away under guardianship, then termination of the legal proceeding still needs to happen afterwards. So I'll just skip through this for now, but you have it as a resource in the statute and on this slide for future use. These are the definitions of incapacitated and financially incapable. The difference between the two is that you need to show someone is incapacitated. Those are the definitions on the left to get a guardian appointed in Oregon. If you want a conservator appointed, you need to show that they are financially incapable. Those are the conditions on the right. You can have one without the other, or you can have them both at the same time, in which case you would ask for both to be appointed. And yes, the guardian and conservator can be the same person. So here's a quick summary of the process. Starts with a petition. Court visitor goes out to check whether or not a person really is incapacitated. Judge makes a decision. Letters, that is the proof of the guardianship or conservatorship, are issued. That's the court order, usually in the form of a limited judgment. That's basically another name for a court order. And the duration will be noted on the letters. Challenging a guardianship, a few more reasons to do that here. Just skim through these so that we can go on to some other things. Resources for finding a guardian. This can often be a challenge, particularly for elders without family members or with few friends willing to help them. A guardian can be somebody from out of state if that is where a responsible relative lives and wants to help out. It's often more helpful to have a guardian in state so that he or she can visit the protected person. But sometimes you just have to get what you can find as far as a guardian goes. So here are some resources for when family member is not instantly available. The GCA, Guardian Conservator Association of Oregon, that link takes you to their member directory. You can search that for available guardians in different areas of the state. You can search by specialty area of what they provide, by zip code, I think, or by city. So that's a good resource to have. Those usually cost some money, but that could end up being a monetary saving if you're trying to prevent continued financial elder abuse, for example. And there are many other reasons that a professional might be more appropriate than having a family member who's not really suitable for one reason or another. Fairly new to Oregon is the Oregon State Public Guardian and Conservator. I provided a link to information there. And if you're in Multnomah County, you also have the Multnomah County Public Guardian as a resource. There's also a resource in Jackson County, but I don't have that link available for you today. So abuse, neglect, and exploitation plays into legal service referrals. As I mentioned earlier, those can come through Adult Protective Services. Generally, I suspect that many people on this call are probably mandatory reporters of abuse, so I just briefly review these requirements.
Thank you. We actually had somebody, we just did a mandatory reporting webinar just a couple months back.
Well, that's perfect.
That's posted on our website, so you can go back and look at that one.
Yep, so please, if you get some spare time, pop onto the mandatory reporting webinar and get additional information there. There are a few different definitions. For example, there are federal definitions for people living in nursing homes and nursing facilities, but otherwise we go by the state laws and administrative rules on abuse. Urgent matters, course 911. Here are Oregon's types of abuse that you will find in Administrative Rule, OAR section 411020 is, I believe, the correct place to go and find the full definitions of those. And I provided the definitions of neglect and self-neglect here, just so you know where to find those. And you may be able to detect one of these going on through a phone call or referral to you. Financial exploitation is just a little more resource detail for you for when these issues come up. There's the APS definition on the left and sections of the relevant statute to go to for when that becomes applicable. So reporting abuse. These are, this information is made available in many types and ways, I think, if you work for the state or a local county agency. Here it is again, some additional information. And last of the priority service areas under the Older Americans Act is age discrimination and referral to a lawyer for handling age discrimination claims. They're usually civil rights based. In Oregon, administratively, as a process for handling these through the Bureau of Labor and Industries, do check out their website for some referrals. That can be an additional referral either instead of or as well as to an attorney. Here are some of the laws and resources for review of age discrimination issues and the laws that apply. And when you get to housing-specific laws, again, the Oregon Landlord-Tenant Act protects applicants for a rental home and for currently existing tenants. And you can find that in ORS Chapter 127. Lastly, I think we come to legal issue spotting. We have just a few minutes left, so we'll go through this fairly quickly and then see if we have time for some questions. Here's a few thank yous to some sources that I cribbed from in preparing this last part. For information, advice, and referral services, again, there's not a great deal of difference between considering health and social issues versus legal issues. In both cases, triage is important, and as we discussed earlier, there are pretty much always time limits and statutes of limitation for following up on your legal claims before losing those legal rights. So basically probe your callee for relevant information and do encourage them to get to an attorney as soon as possible based on the information they give you. If it's not an urgent issue, then simply providing phone numbers for a number of sources or referring them to one of the other referral numbers should be appropriate. This last one is to try and save a little bit of your own time and the caller's time. This is something that is often difficult to do and requires a great deal of tact and empathy. Oftentimes a caller may have already had to speak to several people before reaching you, and to avoid potentially causing that person to relive trauma or get frustrated with the system, so to speak, you can try and encourage them to just divulge the urgent information you need to pass them on to the person that can next help them. And that way, that limits the caller having to give you information that might otherwise be protected by attorney-client privilege. And that might be a good way for you to prompt them to go ahead and tell the rest of the story to the attorney as soon as possible. And that would help both you out and the client, I think. So easy legal issue indicators. You've probably seen these in some other trainings. Here are some basic ones about when you might need to put them in touch with a lawyer. Here are some probing questions that will help you as you go through those. And again, some of them might prompt you to potentially refer to adult protective services in addition to a lawyer if it seems like that would be appropriate. So underlying legal issues, these are some that have been suggested by some national resources on this. All of these potentially suggest the need for an attorney in some situations. Certainly, of course, if it seems like small claims court is going to be an option, you can also refer them to Oregon State Court's website. I think I have that coming up shortly, the link to that, and people can look up for themselves how to appear in small claims court. And indeed, various court websites have videos on how to do that exact thing. So you can either send your callers to one of those, or you can just review that on your own time so that you know a bit more about it yourselves. But again, if in doubt, do refer to a lawyer, and the client can determine later if he or she actually wants to hire that particular lawyer. He gets to meet with. So here are some more typical indicators of need for legal advice. I'm going to skim through these so you can read through these later. We've talked about many of these already. And if you happen to have a particular follow-up question on any of these, then you're welcome to send in an email, and I will put up my contact information on the last slide.
I do know where he sits, too.
Yeah, I am based in Salem, so for those of you that are close to here, you're welcome to come meet with me, but for everybody else, I'm just a phone call away.
These are great. You guys might want to print off some of these slides that have all these questions on them. They're really nice.
Yeah, so if you were to, I won't click on any of these now because we're running out of time, but that middle one is excellent. That is a resource that should probably be made available to most callers, and even your own family members as they age. That benefits checkup, I've referred to that to assist different people, and it's a good, quick, and free way to see what clients may be eligible for. These are probably some pretty typical reasons for somebody to call and get information. How to triage the particular phone call. Abuse screening and referral over to APS. We provided the statewide hotline earlier for that. Suggestions for less urgent referrals. A few more indicators of need. And again, I break this out into two columns. The ones on the left are when somebody else is asking about how to help a third party. The ones on the right are for when the caller, him or herself, needs some help. I mention that because the difference will matter when they go to see an attorney. An attorney will need to decide who his client is going to be. This is just a brief reminder of the difference between legal information and legal advice. For example, all the information I'm giving out today is legal information. You don't have to be an attorney to say any of the stuff that I presented here today. And so if you're not an attorney, you can still go ahead and use all of these resources. And as you know, people should really only give legal advice if they are licensed to do that. And there are various state laws and malpractice insurance requirements going along with that. Here are three particularly good sources of legal information. Do check all of these out so you'll know where to refer people. They give a huge amount of information on just about every possible legal topic an elder will need. And two very good legal service providers here in Oregon. Here's some information about them. Legal Aid Services of Oregon, that's their website information, and the Oregon Law Center. They contract with a large number of AAAs under the Older Americans Act funding. Oregon State Bar's Lawyer Referral Service is here, but their link, that's their disclaimer and information about that. I had a question on this, but we don't get to go to that today. So we'll just about closing up here. Here are the last two referral sources. So you always have those handy. And that's about it.
I think we should do the last question you had.
Let's have a question then.
If a caller has a complaint or a concern about their lawyer, who should they talk to? They talk to their lawyer, to a different lawyer, to the Client Assistance Office at the Oregon State Bar, the APD Legal Assistance Developer, which is Christian, or the Department of Consumer and Business Services. So I'm going to open that up for you guys.
And to give you a clue, I believe this one may have more than one correct answer.
Oh, okay. So you can have more than one right answer.
If I set it up right.
It says select all that apply. So you might be able to do more than one answer on here. So I'll give you another 10 seconds. Anybody else? Want to change your answer? Okay, I'm closing it. Okay, it looks like we had 80% saying the Oregon State Bar and 20% saying Consumer and Business Services.
Okay, so I agree with you mostly. Actually, the one I would have clicked first would have been the first one, her lawyer. You know, having been one, I do see that, you know, much like when people interact with their physician, you know, oftentimes, perhaps too many times, discussion is too much of a one-way street. I do encourage clients to have open discourse with their lawyers, to voice their opinions, to address their concerns, and that can save a lot of sleepless nights and needless worry on both sides there. There are often communication issues or misunderstandings, unfortunately, between a client and a lawyer, and further exploration of that could go a long way to quickly resolving problems or concerns and a few sleepless nights, as I mentioned before. When that doesn't seem applicable or appropriate, or where a client hasn't really got anywhere further after discussing it with that, yeah, I would next pick the Client Assistance Office, the Oregon State Bar. Department of Consumer and Business Services is an option, but I don't think it's generally the most relevant option. So I would like to think that at least 90–95% of problems could be solved with just staying on top of your own lawyer communications and phoning as many times as you need to in doing that. But certainly a client is entitled to good service, and when he or she is not getting that, then the Client Assistance Office would be a great resource.
Great.
Well, thank you for answering that and the other questions. It's been a pleasure to speak with you, and I'm just putting up my contact information. Thank you for your attention and for joining me this afternoon.
Let's see, I'm just looking to see. I want to make sure they have the questions. Okay, I'm not sure they're seeing. Okay, hopefully you guys are seeing Christian's information, and if not, it's at the bottom. It's the very last slide. So it should be there. And for some reason, it's not on mine. Okay, so we have just a couple minutes if anybody has a quick program. Okay, and then hide. I know, thanks Jennifer, it's not going away for some reason. The poll is still showing and I'm not being able to close it. So something's wrong with the webinar, but you guys can look at the bottom of your slide, the bottom of your PowerPoint. It's Christian Hale at DHSOHA. So we will make sure, and I can't figure out why my poll isn't closing. I'm so sorry. Are there any other questions? We will make sure that you guys, if you did not get the last slide on the PowerPoint and you need to get in touch with Christian, just shoot me an email and I will make sure to get you to him. I want to thank Christian a lot. This was a lot of amazing information. I know he went through some of the slides really quickly, but a lot of them were amazing resources and there was a lot of the information there. So thanks very much. I'm going to remind you guys that we did record this and we will be posting it within a few days as soon as we get it closed captioned, and we will post it with the PowerPoint presentation. Watch your email for the next hour or so. Lori Watt will send out an email with a SurveyMonkey, so you can let us know how we did today and how we can make it better next time. The second Wednesday of next month, which I believe is October 9th, we have a presentation on the PACE program. So we're excited to share that with you guys. I'm just double checking the date here. October 11th, the second Wednesday. So we will have another webinar for you, and we'll send a link out toward the end of September. I'm not seeing any questions from anybody, so we will sign off for the day. Thanks so much, Christian. Thanks to you guys for being on there. And feel free to share that it will be posted as soon as we can get it closed captioned. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great afternoon.